And it might be Jenny. I'll just mute. I think I can.
Invite that crosses over it. And then she goes, well, if she's coming, I could do a quick word. So I didn't really want to give her a quick buzz.
It doesn't allow me to mute people. Normally allows you to mute people.
Okay.
I'll do that.
Can you do that?
I think I can. Right, okay, yeah.
It normally lets me, but it hasn't. Oh, Jenny's gone. It must be Lindsay. It doesn't allow me to mute people. Normally allows you to.
Okay, I'll do that.
Can you do that?
Right, okay, yeah.
It normally lets me, but it hasn't. Oh, Jenny's gone. It must be Lindsay. It doesn't allow me to mute people. Normally allows you to.
Okay.
Can you do that?
Okay, I think I can mute people. Parveen, if you can email me with your mobile phone number, I will add it. I'm sorry, I don't have it. Okay, whilst we currently sort out who's on mute and who isn't on mute, I think everybody is on mute.
Oh, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, Sam.
Perfect. Okay, I was talking. So good morning. I was just saying good morning, everybody. Welcome to this session. If I can ask you to pop yourselves on mute if you're not on mute, because we're now live streaming and it will be recorded for people to come and watch us at a later date. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Roger Watson this morning. Roger is an academic dean at Southwest Medical University, China. He's a biology graduate at the University of Edinburgh with his PhD in biochemistry from the University of Sheffield. Roger qualified as a registered nurse from St George's Hospital in London. He has a special interest in feeding and nutritional problems of older people with dementia. He is editor-in-chief of the Nurse Educator in Practice and former editor-in-chief of the Journal of Advanced Nursing and an editorial board member of Wiki Journal of Medicine. He has an honorary position in Hong Kong, Ireland and Slovenia. He is a member of the UK 2008 Research Assessment Exercise Subpanel for the Nursing and Midwifery and a 2014 Research Excellence Framework Subpanel for Allied Health Professionals, Dentistry, Nursing and Pharmacy. In 2017, he was inducted into the Sigma Tai Te International Nurse Research Hall of Fame. And he was also my PhD supervisor. So I'm delighted that Roger's able to join us. He has a wealth of experience and we look forward to him departing some of that knowledge with us this morning. I'll hand over to you, Roger. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sam. I just hope everybody can hear me. I've unmuted myself, but I'm assuming they can. People will let me know if they can. Good. Just to be clear, everyone, I'm not in China at the moment. I'm in Kingston upon Hull. I haven't been in China for a while since I started the position in China, but I'm going quite soon. Okay, I believe we have about an hour to do the session. I might have time to leave some time for questions at the end, but failing that, my email will be on the final slide, and I'm happy to take any questions after the session if people think that's necessary. I'm always available, and if you don't get a note of the email, I'm very easy to find on Google through the journal. So I'm very happy to do that, and in case I don't have time or forget to say it at the end, if people want specific advice on anything that they are writing, then I'm very happy to help. I always offer that sort of after-sales service, and I never get that inundated, unfortunately. So I'm quite happy to do that. So Sam introduced me. I've got a background in nursing, and I'm going to talk from the perspective of the journal that I'm editing at the moment. It's not an advert for that journal. There will be a bit of a commercial break at the beginning of it, but I'm not advertising the journal. And also, I know that the people listening are multidisciplinary. I believe there's nurses, medics, and other professions. I've written in and reviewed for a range of medical journals, psychology journals, and even physiotherapy and occupational health journals. So this is not about nursing journals specifically. It's about the publishing process. So now this always happens. My automatic changer doesn't change the slides. That's it. I'll just make sure that's working. Yeah, that's working. Okay, so I'll just give you a little bit of information about the journal for a start. It's an international journal. We've got an international editorial board. We cover most areas of the world, but we're especially interested in covering the areas from which we receive manuscripts and where we also publish manuscripts. But we're always seeking to widen the editorial board. We publish at the moment 8 volumes per year, although those of you who are familiar with academic publishing or have been reading journals for any of your own work, you'll realise that volumes are pretty irrelevant these days. Everything is online and everything goes up in serial fashion, more or less, as soon as it is published. But we publish 8 volumes per year. We're probably going to increase that soon as we get more submissions. For those of you who are interested at the moment, we have an impact factor of 3.43. Impact factor, I'll explain briefly what it means in a second, but it's one measure of the citations to the journal. And as our publishers are very interested in this, because this to some extent indicates quality, to some extent it drives sales, drives downloads and that kind of thing. And you can see on the graph on the right, our impact factor has been going up steadily over the last few years. And the previous year, we had over 4,000 citations to the journal.
Sorry to interrupt. We're seeing a lovely photo of you, but your slides are very small, or at least on my screen.
Oh, gosh. Right. You shouldn't be seeing me at all, actually. Right. Is everyone getting that view? Oh, how strange.
Okay. Maybe it's because I'm host. I'll go back on mute and ignore me.
It says it's okay on someone else's. It should be okay. It may be because you're hosting it.
As long as everyone else is seeing it, that's fine. That's okay, really not a problem.
I'm sorry about that. I thought that I'll tell you what I will do in terms of me. I'll mute my video. That will blank me off. Yes, everybody seems to be getting it fine. Okay, that's good. Sorry for one person who's not getting it well there. Okay, so just to be clear, impact factor is something that everyone hears about related to journals. It's not that important within the UK, but it's very, very important out of the UK. And essentially, it's a measure of the citations to papers in the previous 2 years in the year when the impact factor is reported. Simple as that. And it's the citations divided by the number of papers that have been published in those previous 2 years. So it's just an arbitrary ratio, just in case anybody wanted to know about the impact factor. Now, once again, because I've fiddled with the screen, that's it. Again, just briefly, this is the present team on the journal, very sort of Western English speaking oriented. We'd like to spread that out a bit as well, but we've got editors in the UK, United States, and in Australia. And again, I've just got a couple more slides on the stats from the journal. What's important here is the bottom slide running from 2018 to 2022, which indicates the numbers of rejections in the journal, and clearly as the number of submissions go in, which is indicated at the top, we haven't got the figures for the 2022 completed yet. We should have them soon, but the number of submissions is going up, and clearly the rejection rate of the journal is going up. And we have 2 points at which we reject. We reject at the desk, which is when articles come in initially, they're screened, and you can see that there's always been, for the last few years, a majority of articles coming into the journal that are rejected, and now I would say it's almost the vast majority that are rejected. And the remainder, which are rejected by the editorial and review process, which I'll talk about in a second. So we do reject a fair number of papers, and that's something that I don't want to put you off trying to submit to journals. Rejection is usually because people don't follow the guidance for the journal, and I will talk about that later. And I'll come back to the process of submitting and getting papers into journals soon, and the sort of things that you need to tick off and look out for. Then again, this is across the board in all journals. What we see is an increasing trend of papers coming in from various parts of the world. And as you can see, the dark blue line there, Asia, mainly represented by China, a huge number of papers coming in these days from China. In fact, I think more scientific papers across the board are published by China than any other country now. They've overtaken the United States, and we see that within nursing too. And if you look at the accepted articles, it doesn't quite follow that trend, of course, because not all of the articles from some of the countries which are, suddenly sending us papers are acceptable for the journal, but a fair number of papers from Asia are. And finally, we work very hard to work on our editorial speeds. I took over the journal in 2020, and we've been trying to reduce the editorial speeds, and in other words, the time it takes to give you a response to a paper. It still takes too long to get to a final decision in 24 weeks, I think. But the main thing is that we do try to give an initial response within a few weeks, and we're always working to get this down. Slow response rates lead to backlogs in the journal and to dissatisfied authors. So we do pay a great deal of attention to this. And the editorial speeds, average number of weeks is also, you can see from 2020 to the present day, coming down. We don't have the full data yet for 2022, but we hope that it's continued to come down. Now, I just wanted to get across to you right at the beginning that the papers which editors find most important and most attractive in a journal are review papers, and there's quite a simple reason for that. Review papers are the ones which are most highly cited, so they contribute towards our overall citations, and they contribute, of course, to our impact factor, which is important for a measure of quality of the journal and keeps us in the sort of league tables. So it's just a hint here that if you can't think of anything else to submit to a journal, review papers are always very popular. So that's the only real pattern that you can see there. There's a couple of editorials that have been highly cited. A COVID paper, of course, one of the early COVID papers was highly cited. There's one down at the bottom there. That's becoming less, so there's less interest in COVID papers and nursing education now. So that's the most recent publication window that we looked at. And if we looked at the all-time citations, we also see that review papers are prominent there. So there's a hint that if you submit a review paper to a journal, it is more likely to be accepted than other types of articles. We only receive maybe about 10% of our papers as review papers. The other 90% are original research and other kinds of discussion papers. So reviews are way overrepresented amongst the highest cited papers. So, as I say, if in doubt about what to send to a journal, send us a review paper. Okay, that's the commercial break completely over in terms of my journal. What I want to talk about now is really about you or me. I'm still an author. That's you or me down at the left with our manuscript in our hot little hand. And what we're trying to do is get up to the top to get the paper accepted. And it just seems if you're an author, and particularly as a novice author, it does seem that there's just a whole bunch of people along the way trying to stop you getting there. Editors-in-chief, editors, reviewers, production team at the journal, everybody's trying to slow the process down and stop you. And indeed, as you've already seen from the figures I presented, the man up at the top right there, Death with a sickle, does get into operation quite often. Papers do in fact get rejected. So I can't, unfortunately, give you a tried and tested formula for getting your manuscript accepted, but what I can do is give you some hints and tips about how not to be accepted. But in the process, what I can help you to do, I hope, is to at least increase the odds of having your paper accepted, because there are one or two things that you really have to pay attention to if you want to be accepted. So I'm going to go through those I'm going to go through those in the next slides. Now, this rather ghastly-looking process here, which I wouldn't expect you to, don't expect you to memorize this, or I'm not going to be asking any questions about it. This is a fairly typical view of the process for any academic journal to which manuscripts are subjected. And you can see at the top left, I don't know if you can see the pointer, but at the top left, the manuscript is submitted there. And it first of all goes for some technical checks like length and for viruses, for plagiarism, for all sorts of things to a technical editor. And they can send it back to you a few times in order to get it right, before which it comes into the process of editing. And then it's assigned to the editor-in-chief, and midwifery papers, of which we get a few, are assigned to the midwifery deputy editor-in-chief. And as I've already shown you, papers can be rejected at that point. And most of the papers that are rejected at that point are rejected because they do not meet the editorial requirements. They don't follow the guidance. There may be other things that we find about them that we don't like, but I have to say most of them simply don't follow our guidance. Articles are then assigned to an editor. They invite reviewers to review the paper. The reviews come back in, and then the editors, they can then decide themselves whether to reject the paper. They don't need to refer back to the editor-in-chief, or they can issue a revision decision, the yellow box on the right. And I would say that of the articles that get into that system, the vast majority require some revision. And as you already have seen in the initial slides, the vast majority of rejected papers are rejected at the desk reject stage. And what we're trying to do by that is only to put articles into the process that we think will be accepted. Not all of them get accepted. Another maybe 10% or so do get rejected out of those. But we're trying not to jam the system up, including our hardworking reviewers, with articles which we think are not going to be accepted. If the paper is finally accepted by the editor, it goes up to the top right, up to the green box, and then there's a few more processes that it goes through then before it's finally published. You don't really need to concern yourself too much with those parts of the process, except that if you do get an email indicating that your article has been accepted, that isn't the end of the process. It then has to be edited, and it then has to be proofed, and you have to check those proofs, and that's the last opportunity you get to check the article before it goes online. Unfortunately, typographical errors that go online, other mistakes, even in authorship, cannot be corrected on the PDF once it's published and has a digital object identifier, a DOI number. It has to stay as it is, but we can issue we can issue corrigendum and addendums to make sure that mistakes are picked up and indicated, but we can't change the published proof. So that's an overview of the process, and having worked for several publishers and worked on many journals, that process is pretty standard across the whole of the publication industry. The reason I like to share this with potential authors is to help them to understand what's going on behind the scenes. It does seem to take a long time for an article for first of all to hear about it, and then to have a review back to you, and then finally to be accepted. But it is going through a process, and that process, of course, takes time. Only other thing I want to say about this processes, and you're probably aware of this already, this all happens online. There's no hard copy of anything these days. We no longer send hard copies of manuscripts to journals. Everything happens online, and every major publisher, like I work for Elsevier now, but I used to work for Wiley, they all have their own dedicated systems. Some publishers share systems, but they have them customized for themselves. So you have to learn a little bit about the system before you're submitting it. And my watchwords about submitting a manuscript to an article are: don't do it at 5 to 5 at night before you're going to close up your office and go and catch the bus home. You've got to leave plenty of time to do this, because it does take a little bit of time to master and get through those processes. However, first of all, before you get to those processes, you have to write a manuscript. And I'm not going to talk too much about writing techniques today. I'm very happy to come back at some other time to talk about those. I do have presentations on the rules of writing and improving writing and things like that, but it's mostly about the process today. And I've learned myself as an author over the years, and I've seen it from the editorial perspective, is that really when you're writing a manuscript, you really need to write it first for the editors. I know that when we write something, we usually think, what's it going to look like if it's published? Who's going to read it? Will my friends see this? Will my mum see this, or whatever? And that's not the right way to think. I think you have to think, first of all, what does the editor want? He or she will have specific requirements. They will be published on the journal web page under the guidance. You've got to study those and meet those. If you don't make an impression on the editor that your paper is following the guidance, that it's original, that it's a substantial contribution, and so forth, then it won't get past the editor to the next stage. I'm going to talk about the reviewing process later. That's the part of the process where we ask experts to take a look at your manuscript. The reviewers are there to help us make decisions. They're not there to make the decisions. But you need to then think, after ticking off what the editor needs, you need to think about the reviewers. So you're all clinicians, you may be writing about your clinical area, and you may be using a particular method, for example, randomized controlled trial or whatever, to study your particular area. So you need to realize that if possible, in theory, we would try to get clinical experts to review your manuscript, or in my case, education experts, because mine's an education journal. We would also try and hope to get methodological experts and possibly even statisticians involved if there's statistics in the article. So you need to be aware and to appreciate and think and address the fact that there will be experts looking at your manuscript. And I'll talk about the reviewing process later, but when I was handling reviews for articles, and I do reviewing myself, but I remember when I was handling reviews as an editor, one of the most common comments from reviewers was, I don't understand what the author's done here. I don't understand what this team has done here. So you've got to write transparently, completely, and again, the watchword would be, if in doubt, put it in and make sure that it's in there. It's always easier to remove something from a manuscript under request to do that than to add something if it's not there, because if it's not there, you may be rejected. So don't have any fears about being complete in addressing the reviewers. And finally, your audience. And you won't get to the audience, of course, unless you address what the editors and the reviewers want. Now, this happens to be the landing page for my journal, but as I say, everything's online. All journals are online. And what you must do when you first turn to any journal is to find the guidance for authors. And that's what we as editors want to see being addressed. In fact, as editors, we're busy people. These are not our day jobs necessarily, and we are, to some extent, I hate to say it, but rather superficial people. We're trying to get through this initial stage as quickly as possible. And I know from talking to fellow editors, it would be unusual if we spent 10 minutes on a manuscript that's been submitted at the beginning. Sometimes we do, but not always. 5 to 10 minutes, having a quick look at it, having a look at the abstract, having a look at the title, having a quick look at the paper, just to see if it feels good. We want the detailed handling of the papers to be done by our editors and reviewers. But as I say, if it doesn't meet what we require at this point, it may well be rejected. So the first thing that you should do, if you've selected a journal and you think it's the place to send your article, look at the guidance for authors, and always look at the recent guidance. Don't print off copies, or you can get PDFs of it, but I would strongly advise you to go online and look at the latest version. We update these at least annually, and often we update them in between. So you can download the guidance, and you can see there, but also you can see the sort of things that that the guidance is telling you. That's the online guidance. Below that, tells you what types of manuscripts we want, about ethics, which I'll talk about later, declaring your interests, covering letters, tells you about the peer review process. Everything you need to know should be there. And we often update our guidance on the basis of what authors tell us, because they read it and say, actually, I didn't see such and such there, or your guidance is a little bit confusing, or that seems to be in the wrong place. So we do respond to what authors tell us about it. And on the same page, although there's a separate link, there's a link there about submitting your paper, and that takes you into the online system. You have to register there before you can submit, and also tells you about open access options and so forth. Open access is another issue altogether. So what gets published? Well, there's a range of things. Don't feel that you have to just publish original papers or research papers. In my journal, we have a range of things that get published. Ours is quite narrow. Some journals have bigger ranges, but we publish editorials, and very often they are highly cited, as you saw from the high cited papers. They often get us a lot of attention to the journal. We just published an editorial the other day where the actual editorial was written using a chat box. It was done by an author deliberately to show how chat boxes, online chat boxes, could be used to write papers. And the first two paragraphs of the editorial, quite substantial paragraphs, were written using Chat GPT, where she just asked it questions about something, it had given answers, and she pasted them in. And this paper was picked up by Nature the other day, and it's literally gone viral. So editorials, we're always welcoming editorials. The more original, and in some ways the more controversial, the better. As I've shown you already, we publish review papers, and we value these greatly. Any editor will tell you that, from any discipline at all. Review papers are valued, they're highly cited, and of course they're highly cited because they're used by other researchers, and primarily, I think, by PhD students. We also publish original papers. That's the vast majority of the papers, and by original papers, I mean papers based on original research, quantitative studies, qualitative studies, randomized controlled trials, and so forth. And we don't get many of these, and people often, well, we get many, we don't publish many because people often miss the target, but we do like discussion papers of issues. In my journal, it would be issues in education, or as we recently published, issues about research methods in education. So we always welcome discussion papers, and in fact, we get few, but they're usually highly cited as well, but they're important parts of scholarship in the field. So if you turn to the guidance for a journal, within that guidance, the aims and the scope of the journal are very important. You have to make sure that you are submitting articles that are within the scope of the journal. And I don't know how many submissions I get a week at the moment, maybe 30 or 40. There are always a few which do not fall within the scope of the journal. I edit an educational journal. I often get papers which are purely clinical, for example. That's one thing that would be outside the scope of the journal. Or I get papers from other fields which are not within nursing. So you should have a look at the mission of the journal. What is it trying to do? They always have roughly the same words about being international, high quality, leading edge, and so forth. But you want to look at that, and if possible, address that and play up to it when you're either sending a covering letter, or when you're writing your article. What the journal publishes. I've shown you that already, but make sure that it does take what you intend to publish. Don't send things that are outside the scope of what it publishes. The nature of the articles published, in other words, they're international. They've got to address an international audience, and they're peer reviewed. The word international comes up a lot these days. I don't by international mean that your research has to be international or that you have to work with international colleagues. What I mean is you have to acknowledge in the background, the literature, and in writing it up, how this might be relevant to people outside of your own area. So if you do a study in Doncaster, it doesn't mean to say it isn't relevant to other areas. And again, who's the intended readership? Is the journal for academics? Is it for clinicians? Is it for both? And to try and address that. So, for example, in my field, there would be a great difference between writing something, for example, for the Nursing Standard and writing it for my journal or the Journal of Advanced Nursing. There'd be a difference in the style that you would use to write, or the different level that you may pitch the article at. Excuse me. Now, the peer review process, this is the mysterious process that really people worry about. And people are concerned about it because if they haven't submitted before, they won't be used to it. And the peer review process, very idealized picture of it here, is presented as a sort of cooperative process between authors, publishers, reviewers, and of course editors. And it is meant to be that way. We're all meant to be helping each other. The reviewers are meant to be helping us to make decisions about which papers are suitable for publication and in what form they're suitable for publication. In other words, do they need revision? And we are hopefully helping, obviously, as editors, the publishers to publish the best that they can publish, and hopefully helping the authors to do the same, bearing in mind that when something's published, it's in the public domain forever. Your publications will outlast you, so you want them to be as good as they possibly can be. But sometimes it doesn't feel like that, and it certainly doesn't feel like that when you get seemingly harsh comments and also get rejected. And I would say regarding the harsh comments, they shouldn't be harsh, they shouldn't be rude, they may just seem harsh. You have to address them if you want to get published. If you're rejected, my motto here is make a rejection the beginning of the next submission, find another journal. It's not a personal rejection. You may be able to make some adjustments and have your study published elsewhere. But the peer review process is meant to be helpful. Now, most journals, particularly in nursing, it's not been such a tradition in hard sciences and in some areas of psychology, but most nursing journals, and as far as I'm aware, medical journals, use what's called double-blind peer reviewing. In other words, the reviewer doesn't know who you are, and vice versa, you don't know who they are. That's to protect individuals and to prevent reviewers from being swayed by who you are. Are they more likely to publish you if you're a famous professor or than if you're an MSc student or whatever? However, I must warn you that things are changing, and we are moving further towards open peer review now, whereby at least one party knows the other. Usually the reviewers will know who the authors are, but in journals like the BMC, the Biomed Central Suite of Journals, PLOS ONE, and many other journals like Frontiers set of journals and so forth, review is now open and everyone knows who everyone else is. And this is meant to improve transparency. And journals like my own offer reviewers the opportunity to, we still make the authors anonymous up until the point of publication, but we offer reviewers the opportunity to identify themselves if they want to. This, of course, can lead to difficulties. There have been some famous cases where there have been difficulties. However, under the open science framework in Europe, which is spreading across the world, open peer review is very much, I think it's going to be the future. And not only open peer review, but publishing the actual reviews as well. And that happens in BMC Central and in the PLOS ONE journals. So things are changing in terms of peer review. Peer review, again, a mysterious process, but it's not perfect. It's not a scientific process. It's a matter of an exchange of opinions on which judgments are made. And here from this the Russell report on ClimateGate. That's a famous sort of scandal around climate research at one British university. But peer review was described there as a means of sieving out evident error, so we can see obvious things that are obviously wrong if we have experts reviewing, currently unacceptable practices, anything that's unethical, repetition of previously published work without acknowledgement, that means copying or plagiarism, and trivial contributions that add little to knowledge if it doesn't really make a substantial contribution. Again, that's a judgment, but that's how it works. And just as a matter of interest, this is the landing page from my previous journal, and one of my editors with whom I worked in the same university said, come and have a look at this. Down the right are the decisions made by the reviewers. We had 3 reviewers here. One was a statistical reviewer. Statistical reviewer said revision is necessary for this article. One said accept and one said reject. So they are not making the decisions, they are making a recommendation. The editor then had to work his way between these and come to a decision. I actually don't know what that decision was, but on a very high quality, high pressure journal, that may well lead to rejection. On smaller journals, it may lead to revision. Again, it's a judgment that the editor has to make. So just to emphasize, reviewing is not a scientific process, it's a matter of exchanging opinions and coming to some judgment about those opinions on the article. Okay, that's everything I want to say about that part of the process. What I want to do for the remainder is to tick off 1 or 2 things that you need to pay attention to when you are submitting to journals these days. Again, and these things may not be familiar to you as potential authors, but I'm sure all of you are reading scientific papers, and many of these things will already be familiar to you. And I don't issue homework from these, but if I was to issue homework, there are 2 websites I would urge you to look at. One is the Equator Network website, which is easy to find on Google, and I'm going to come back to the Committee on Publication Ethics website later. I think it would be well worth having a look at both of these for general guidance. Now, the Equator Network gathers together all the sort of standardized guidance that we now require for submitting particular kinds of articles. And again, those of you in clinical research will be well aware of, for example, the consort guidance for submitting randomized controlled trials. Any of you involved in systematic reviews will be aware of the PRISMA guidance. I'm going to look at these 2 here today, but there are now, I don't know what, Equator Network used to contain about 5 or 6 sets of guidance. I believe there's something like 80 sets of guidance there now. There's all sorts of different bits of guidance for different kinds of clinical trials. There's qualitative guidance, there's case control study guidance, all sorts of guidance is available now. And strobe guidance for survey studies and so forth. So I would strongly urge you, when you're submitting an article, go to the Equator Network and find the relevant set of guidance. The journal will almost certainly require you to do that anyway. So just by way of example, I'm going to show you 2 sets. One is the consort guidance, which some of you may already be familiar with, consolidated guidance for randomized controlled trials. Of course, it's got a web page. It's also under Equator, easy to find on Google. And it's got a landing page which looks a little bit like this. It's probably been updated recently, but on that you'll see at the top there's lots of different types of extensions for different kinds of randomized controlled trials. For example, randomized controlled trials of alternative medicines and that kind of thing. But the important thing is that there's a checklist. I'm not going to go through the checklist here. It's a 25-item checklist, which is well worth taking a look at. But this ticks off all the aspects of a clinical trial. It essentially tells you how to write a clinical trial paper. And then there's a flow diagram with which many of you will already be familiar. The checklists are not published, but the flow diagrams are, but we require the checklist to be submitted with the article. And once the article's published, again, you'll be familiar with this. This is the consort flow diagram. It's a way of tracking everyone who is eligible to be admitted into the clinical trial and everyone who ended up being used at the end of the trial for data and all the different levels in between for the intention to treat analysis to see how the effect of dropout affected the results. So it's a way of tracking everybody who could be in the clinical trial and in fact everyone who was in, and of course people drop out for all sorts of reasons. I just wanted to make sure before I move on to PRISMA that any of you involved in randomized controlled trials involving human subjects have to know that all the major publishers, Elsevier, Sage, BMJ, all the major publishers are signed up to the All Trials campaign of Ben Goldacre. That's the man in the middle of the picture there. This is an international set of guidance now whereby if you are carrying out a randomized controlled trial with a clinical trial, then it has to be registered on a recognized registration site for clinical trials. We don't actually have one, as far as I know, in the UK, but there is a European one, which despite the fact we're no longer in Europe, I believe we can still use. But there are other ones available, clinicaltrials.gov, which is, I see a comment here is going to check that. That's okay. There's somebody's put up the network, Equator Network, thanks. Clinicaltrials.gov is a very common one. Your hospital or your university has to be associated with that, of course. It costs money. What else? Also, sorry, for Chinese colleagues, there is a Chinese site. There are sites in most countries, and there's nothing to stop you using any of these, provided it's registered, provided the protocol is there, provided that you can get a link, a URL link, to provide in the paper to which people can check that registration. But the purpose of this is that all trials are accounted for, and that people, particularly big pharma, don't bury data away that doesn't show essentially what they want it to show, that a drug works. So all trials are registered, all trials are accounted for. And the second and final set of guidance, I say I could go on, we could have a whole presentation on Equator guidance. We don't have time to do that, and it wouldn't be necessary. But just as another common example, the PRISMA guidance, which is the preferred system for reporting systematic reviews and meta-analysis. Again, there's a PRISMA checklist and a PRISMA flow diagram, extensions, translations, and all sorts available there. Checklist has to be submitted with a systematic review, and you can also register at the Equator Network. It's not compulsory yet. Sorry, at Prospero, which is above there. And this is what you see. This is not the latest version. I have to say there's a new version of PRISMA, but I haven't got a hold of that yet. But this is, again, so you can account for every single article that could have been in your study by being found initially, but remained in the study after screening. And it gives you the number of articles that were followed through. So it's a way of accounting for what you've done in the systematic review process. But again, I'm sure I can imagine that almost anybody who's read any academic articles recently in their field will have come across studies with these kinds of flow diagrams in them. I would strongly advise you, just as a matter of interest, if you are doing the studies and you need to use these flow diagrams, they're available in Word form, and you can actually download them and paste them into your manuscript. And publishers like that because they're very easy then to subsequently use, rather than trying to make up your own flow diagrams. Again, second, final piece of homework, as it were, promoting integrity in research and publication. I think in 1987, the editors of the then editor of the British Medical Journal and the editor of the Lancet, I think the current editor, Richard Horton, got together to discuss publication ethics specifically within medicine and set up COPE. However, COPE is now relevant way beyond medicine into all fields of health and, in fact, into all aspects of publication anywhere. So COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics, is a site, an organisation to which most major publishers have signed up. If a publisher's not signed up with COPE, and there are one or two large exceptions, I would be reluctant. I'd be more reluctant to publish there than if they are signed up to COPE. And COPE is really a web page which provides guidance for authors, for editors, for reviewers on how to behave ethically. Well worth having a look at, constantly being updated. And you can sign up for the COPE newsletter and follow the cases that are there. I'm going to be involved in a case soon myself that's coming up in the COPE forum. It's about promoting integrity in research and its publication, and it provides core practices. There's really codes of practice, but they call them core practices, and you can see the list of them there. There are more, but how to handle allegations of misconduct, how to handle authorship contribution, how to handle appeals, conflicts of interest, and so forth. There's nothing about ethics and publication that isn't covered on this website. It also tells us as editors how to handle complaints. And all that's available, and all of it's transparent. And there are training videos to which you can sign up to learn about publication ethics, and they're free to listen to. Excuse me. Now, there's another issue I want to cover before I move on. And that's the issue of authorship. Down at the bottom there, who is an author? It's also, this website also covers conflicts of interest. Now, this is a website, the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors website. Again, it is used way beyond medicine. Every field of health uses it, but it's being used in other fields too, because it provides guidance about authorship. I'm not going to deal with conflicts of interest here. That's a huge area. It's very important that people are acknowledged as authors. So anybody who's had a part in writing a paper, and a substantial part, should be there as an author, and anybody who hasn't shouldn't be. So, for example, if any of you sent me an article to edit or to take a look at, that would not make me eligible to be an author. For example, if you carried out a study in your hospital, it doesn't mean to say that the director of medicine or the chief medical officer should be involved in that as an author. That used to happen, but it shouldn't happen, and we can't police it, but at least we can give guidance on how to make decisions. So there's a very useful table from the National Institute for Health in the USA. You can download it, the general guidelines for authorship contribution, and it's very useful. Green means go, purple means no, and you can see that there are actually very few areas where it's a clear green for being included as an author. Everything else is nuanced, and you have to come to a decision, but there are quite a few areas where you shouldn't be an author. Those are the purple lines there. But basically, the list of authors should, I'll go back again. The list of authors should show who made a substantial contribution to the work. All authors have got to take responsibility for the work, and so forth. But again, I won't go into that in detail here. You can check the ICMGE website, which has got a very clear set of guidance there about authorship. Now, I think I mentioned this at the beginning. Every manuscript that comes to a journal is checked for, it says preventing plagiarism, but it's actually checked for similarity. We don't make decisions about whether something's plagiarized without investigating it. But similarity covers duplication, in other words, people presenting the same work again, or plagiarism, which is copying other people's work. And again, this is part of a much bigger presentation on publication ethics, which I'm again very happy to talk about some other time if people want me to do that. And we all there's different kinds of software. We use Authenticate at the major publishers, but there are other ways of checking it. Those of you who've taught in universities, this is very similar to the software that's used there for looking at plagiarism in student work. Now, just to be clear, we don't have, and I'm often asked, what's the percentage of similarity you're allowed? We don't work like that. Some articles, some manuscripts can be 10% similar to another source, but that whole 10% can have been lifted from another source. So that would constitute plagiarism. Some articles can be 50% similar, but it can just be scattered bits throughout in various words which are unavoidable. So we have to look at each one and see what the pattern of similarity is. And the people who check these at the desk are getting very good at that. And again, the reports come through to my editors. They're available to me too, but I pass them on to the editors. If they've got any doubts, they check it as well. So it's not a matter of percentage; it's a matter of judgment. COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics, which you just saw me refer to, has advised, in fact, urged editors to be more lenient about people copying methods from their own previous papers, because very often people do longitudinal studies or they do large studies where the methods are the same, or they repeat studies. So that's something we're a little bit more lenient about these days than we perhaps used to be. So what happens if you're caught plagiarizing? I just want to end on a slightly negative note, but if you are caught plagiarizing, the journal will publish a statement, and some journals, not all, will put a retraction watermark through the article. I think the important thing for you to realize as authors, if you are caught plagiarizing, which of course you would never be, is that it remains in the public domain. The paper doesn't disappear, usually. That's changed slightly since COVID for some reason, but the paper will stay there and it will be published alongside a statement. And the important words in the statement are that the retraction has been agreed due to overlap with other previously published material written by third parties. The word plagiarism is actually never used because it has legal connotations. So that's one thing that will happen. Similarly, on duplication, this is from the Journal of Advanced Nursing and an article duplicated in 2 other journals. There's only one referred to here. In fact, it was duplicated in 2 other journals, and the retraction has been agreed due to duplicate publication of the same article in 2 journals. Now, it's fair to say that once the employer of the first, and not fair to say, but I feel I should warn you of the potentially serious consequences, the first author of all of these papers lost her job as a result of this. So the consequences of doing these things can be quite serious. We hate them as editors because they take so much time to investigate. They often take years to investigate. So I'm going to finish there and perhaps have time for questions. I've taken less than an hour, but it's coming to the top of the hour, which I know some people have to get away. I'd like to point you towards, and whether you're a nurse or not, I'd like to point you towards this excellent journal published by my previous publishers called Nurse, Author and Editor. It's mainly written for, well, it's nearly exclusively written for my editors, including myself. And it just contains lots and lots of practical advice to all the questions that authors ask. For example, referring to some of my own articles in here, how to write an abstract for a paper, how to start the introduction to a paper, how to construct a discussion section for a paper. It's all there. And then also how to use social media, how to blog, how to use Twitter to push your papers, and all the sort of things that I haven't had time to talk about today. So I would urge you to take a look at Nurse, Author and Editor. To me, as a Scotsman, it's very attractive because it's free to download. It's a society journal that's backed by the International Academy of Nursing Editors, so it's well worth taking a look at. So that's all I've got to say. I'll leave this up for a few seconds if anybody wants to note my email address, but again, it's easy to find online. There's a few other things here that are worth taking a look at. Well, one is my own Twitter site. If you're on Twitter and you're really bored, you can follow me. I promise I do have professional sites, as you saw. I've got the journal site, I've got a site for my own company and things like that, but that's a personal site, but you're welcome to follow me there. You might not like everything that I say there, but that's can't be helped. That line in the middle below my email is ORCID, and if you don't know what ORCID is, if you're thinking of publishing, you should register with ORCID. Google it, go to ORCID, takes you about 2 minutes to register there, and once you've registered there, you can put all your publications there. And in fact, it machine learns, and it will find your publications, and it will put them up there, especially if when you're submitting papers you use your ORCID number in the submission process. What this does is it puts your work in the public domain and makes sure that it belongs to you. And it gives you a URL that you can scan, and that will take you straight to for example, if you scan that, it will take you to my own ORCID site. Down at the bottom is a site for corresponding with Chinese authors called WeChat. That won't be quite so relevant to you. So that's my email address if people want to contact me. And if you want to look at my own research record, you're welcome to take a look at my ORCID page. It's in the public domain. So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to finish that, turn my video on, and unfortunately I don't know how to stop sharing. Oh, that's it. That's it. Right. Stop share. That's it. Right. I'm back on screen. Sarah?
There we are. Thank you so much for that. I'm sure there are going to be questions.
Okay.
Before then, I'm going to jump in and just stick something in chat, which Parveen and I have been keen to collect, which is information about people's job roles. So we have a word cloud collector that's coming into chat now. So if you have 2 seconds, click on there. If you see your own job role already mentioned, click on that in the cloud and it will allow you to submit without typing for convenience. If you don't see your own job role there, please add it. It'd be tremendously helpful for us to collate feedback with the wonderful variety of job roles we've been attracting to the webinars. So thank you for that little bit in there. And now please do pop your hand up or just shout out. There's so few of us on today. Please ask Professor Watson your questions. You'll never get a better opportunity than this.
Everyone's sleeping.
I know, that was a bit too daunting, wasn't it?
My daughter was at university at the beginning of COVID, so she said, "You log in, put your camera off, and then fall asleep."
Yes, I've done team sessions like that. It's not the best. Well, while people are thinking of their questions, I have one. I don't have the details to hand, which is annoying, but I've recently read a paper that was a huge criticism of the peer review process. Yeah. And I wonder if you're aware of kind of the burbling thoughts on that and how you would respond.
Yeah, no, very much so. It's a subject which is constantly under discussion by editors and publishers. The International Nursing Association for International Academy of Nursing Editors in the States last year, we discussed it in detail. It's one of these systems that's been plaguing us for a long time. Peer review has been around for a long time, but not as long as many people think. Initially, in academic publication, editors just published articles. When journals first started, and peer review probably maybe only has a record of about 100 years or so, something like that. Parveen and I actually wrote an article about it. Now, so I'm digressing a little bit, but when the ClimateGate scandal came up, which I referred to earlier, which was research at East Anglia University, where climate change activists researchers were possibly skewing the data. Can't quite remember how it all came out, but the public began to question what's this peer review process about. They said, surely if things are peer reviewed, misinformation shouldn't get into the public domain. Well, we all know that's not true now, and what happened was there was a massive parliamentary investigation. There's a huge report, which I have read from cover to cover, and it's all televised on parliamentary TV over a whole week of submissions from publishers, authors, research bodies, and so forth. And what the conclusion they came to, maybe about 10 years ago, was peer review was absolutely terrible, but there's not a better system that we can invent. So that was then. But now there are possibilities of kind of almost automating the peer review process. And I know a great many publishers are looking into this, automating it in the sense of if people submit, for example, an equator set of guidance, can that be checked off? You know, can the database be checked off automatically? Can the statistics be checked? I mean, it's quite incredible what people think can be done using artificial intelligence. So I think my only comment is that we're aware of it, and we're always looking for ways to improve it. I'm involved in a project in Slovenia where we're going to try and use artificial intelligence to review papers, and we're also going to compare those with the original reviews. It's just sort of getting underway. That might be quite interesting. But you know, many people say, well, you know, we've got to have a minimum of 2 reviewers, or we're not allowed to sit on the impact factor list. But some people say, oh, well, maybe you should get more reviewers. There's no evidence that using more reviewers makes any difference, really. And of course, it slows the process down. It seems to be the optimum seems to be 2 or 3 reviewers. So that's a rambling answer to a very simple question. Yes, I know about the issues, and we are aware of them, and we're always trying to improve them as much as we possibly can.
Thank you. So we have a question in chat from Emma, who's saying, hi, this might be a silly question, and I doubt this. I'm very new to thinking about getting something published. Once something has been rejected at any stage, can you go back and make changes and then resubmit? Or once your article's rejected, is that it?
What an excellent question, because I've just had this issue with a PhD student. You can make, but if something is rejected by a journal, that is, unless the editor indicates otherwise, that is final from that journal. But with any luck, if it's been through the review process, they will give you the reviews. And on that basis, you can then make improvements to the paper, always try and do that, and then you can submit it to another journal. There's nothing to stop you doing that at all. So it's not the end of the process if a paper is rejected. It's only the end of the process with that particular journal. You mustn't resubmit to the same journal. The other thing is that be careful. Sorry, I'm answering a question which hasn't been asked, which my wife says I'm good at, but don't submit to more than one journal at once as well. And that seems obvious to most people, but some people don't understand that. You can only submit to one at a time. Otherwise, you might be accused of breaking copyright, because you assign the copyright when you submit it. It's given back to you if it's rejected, obviously. So you have to be careful about that. But a good question, which I'm sure many people wonder about.
How much difference would there need to be in order to write up about the same project, but in subtly different ways, so that you could legitimately submit it to 2 different journals?
Excellent question. Yes, another. These are, I have to say, these are fairly common questions, and I should probably have something comment about this in my presentation. Yeah, I mean, once you've published an article, there are 2 ways to publish it in another way. One is in another language. At one time that wasn't permitted, but these days publishers are quite happy to see papers published in other languages, although you should check with the receiving and the sort of sending journals and tell them you're doing that. To be different, I'm trying to think of the circumstances under which you might want to do, but I know that I've published, for example, in Journal of Advanced Nursing, a sort of complicated, sort of large study, lots of statistics and whatever in it. I've also published from that study in Nursing Standard, a more accessible piece for the general public, and for nurses in general who may not be so aware of research and research methods, and they do have to be different. One of the sort of rules is you can't use the same data again without permission. But if you do, if there was, for example, a table in one that really had to be in the other one, you can get permission from the original publisher to republish it and make sure that the receiving publisher knows that you're doing that. And publishers actually never refuse to do this, in my experience. They just want to know if you're doing it. But you'd have to make it different in terms of substantially sort of rewording it. You couldn't just copy out sections of that. You'd have to make it different. And I find the best way to do that is to put the original one aside and just to start writing it again. There'll be similarities, of course, but just to start again. So it would have to be different. But I couldn't put a figure on it. I couldn't put a figure on it. You've just got to make an effort to make it different. And I think if you're writing for what I found, for example, I'm using Nursing Standard as an example. I find they're very rigorous and they're very helpful when you're writing an article. They know what will be read and what's readable, and that's which we don't always pay too much attention to in academic journals. The articles are often pretty unreadable. They'll be very helpful in telling you what you can and can't do, provided they know that you're taking it from another source.
Thank you. No, that's really clear. Do we have any more questions, either in chat or come off mute, come off video and blurt it out there? And while you're thinking, I'm going to stick another little thing into chat for our purposes, which is our evaluation survey for our webinars. Would be delighted if you would give us 2 minutes just to let us know what you've made of today's session, and any suggestions that you have for other topics would be most appreciated. Okay, last call for questions. This is fantastic opportunity. If there's something that's niggling you, get it out there.
Contact me after.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Watson. I think unless someone jumps in right now, then we possibly have, you've given us so much information, there was no need for questions.
Okay. Well, my pleasure, Sarah. Maybe meet again. Happy to do some other sessions if Parveen's unable to do them.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, I would love to talk to Parveen about that. Yeah. That would be great.
Okay.